It was the summer of 19 to their shoulders. About 2 miles in, they reached their campsite, a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. It was isolated, far from the main path, just as they wanted. Emily remarked on how quiet it was. No birds, no crickets. It's almost too quiet. Perfect, Jake said with a grin. No distractions. As night fell, they built a fire, the flames crackling and dancing against the darkening sky. David told stories of urban legends, his deep voice weaving suspense into the air. Sarah, who was usually the bravest, shivered. "Come on, guys. You know I hate this stuff," she said, laughing nervously. "Don't worry," Jake teased, "if anything tries to grab you, we'll use you as bait." The group erupted in laughter, but their jokes couldn't shake the growing unease in the pit of Thea. Around midnight, as the fire dwindled, a strange noise echoed through the woods. It was faint at first, like a low whistle carried by the wind. Emily was the first to hear it. "Did you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Jake replied, tossing another log onto the fire. "Shh," Emily hissed, holding up a hand. The group fell silent, straining to listen. There it was again, closer this time. A long, mournful whistle, followed by a soft rustling in the trees. "It's probably just the wind," David said, though his eyes betrayed his uncertainty. "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "That doesn't sound like the wind." The group exchanged uneasy glances. They decided to turn in for the night, chalking it up to their imaginations. Morning brought little relief. When they stepped out of their tents, they found strange markings in the dirt around their campsite, circles and symbols etched into the ground. They were crudely drawn, yet deliberate, as if someone, or something, had been there while they slept. "Okay, this is officially creepy," Emily said, her voice trembling. Jake, trying to lighten the mood, joked, "Maybe the forest has an artist-in-residence program." But no one laughed. David inspected the symbols closely. "I've seen something like this before," he said slowly. It's old. Like, really old. Native American, maybe?" Sarah looked around nervously. "We need to leave. Now." Together, their flashlights darting into the darkness. "Who's there?" David shouted, his voice breaking. The growling stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall and thin, its limbs unnaturally long. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting the firelight. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, tears streaming down her face. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Jake grabbed a stick from the fire, waving it toward the figure. "Stay back," he yelled. The creature let out an ear-piercing shriek, a sound so unnatural it made their blood run cold. It retreated into the woods, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. "We're leaving. Now!" Sarah screamed, grabbing her backpack. The group didn't argue. They packed up in a frenzy, their hands shaking so badly it was hard to buckle their gear. As they made their way down the trail, the forest seemed alive with movement. Shadows darted between the trees, and the whistling grew louder, more insistent. They stumbled blindly through the darkness, their flashlights flickering. Emily tripped and fell, scraping her knees. David helped her up, but they were losing time. "Keep moving," Jake shouted, his voice hoarse. The creature's shriek echoed through the woods again, closer this time. They could feel its presence, the oppressive weight of its gaze. "We're not going to make it," Sarah sobbed, clutching Emily's arm. "Yes, we will," David yelled. "Just keep running." As they neared the trailhead, the creature appeared again, blocking their path. It was even more terrifying up close, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. Jake, desperate, charged at it with his makeshift torch. "Get out of here!" he screamed. The creature swatted him aside like a rag doll. Jake hit the ground hard, groaning in pain. David grabbed a large branch and swung it at the creature, but it barely flinched. It lunged at him, its claws narrowly missing his face. Emily and Sarah screamed, their voices echoing into the night. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the forest. The creature shrieked and retreated into the shadows. The group turned to see headlights. Park rangers had arrived, alerted by their earlier decision to log their trip with local authorities. "What the hell is going on here?" one of the rangers demanded, stepping out of his truck. There's something out there," Emily cried, pointing into the woods. But when they turned back, the creature was gone. The rangers escorted the group back to safety, but the creature was never found. Locals spoke of similar sightings over the years, always in the same area. David, Emily, Jake, and Sarah never went camping again. They tried to move on, but the memories lingered, haunting their dreams. To this day, they wonder what would have happened if the rangers hadn't shown up. And sometimes, late at night, they swear they can still hear the whistle. It started with a map, a crinkled, yellowed piece of paper that David found in his late grandfather's attic. It was tucked away in a locked chest, surrounded by old photographs and faded letters. The map showed a section of the Catskill Mountains, with a spot marked simply as Black Hollow Cabin. David's grandfather had always been a mysterious man, prone to telling strange tales about his younger days. Most were dismissed as harmless ramblings, but this map intrigued David. He brought it to his three closest friends, Megan, Kyle, and Lily, and proposed an idea. "Let's check it out," he said. "A weekend hike, maybe spend the night at the cabin. Who knows what we'll find?" Lily hesitated, her brow furrowing. "You're sure this is safe? I mean, your grandpa wasn't exactly the poster child for sanity." David laughed. "It's just an old cabin in the woods. What's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words. They set out on a crisp October morning, the air cool and tinged with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. The trail wasn't on any modern maps, but the group followed the old hand-drawn one with excitement, weaving through dense forest and climbing steep inclines. By late afternoon, they found it, a clearing surrounded by towering oaks, with a dilapidated cabin standing at its center. The structure looked ancient, its wooden planks warped and covered in moss. A sagging porch stretched across the front, its steps creaking home. "This place is creepy," Megan muttered, clutching her jacket tightly. "It's just old," David said, pushing open the cabin door. The interior was just as unsettling. Dust coated every surface, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel adorned with strange carvings. "Look at this," Kyle said, pointing to the symbols etched into the stone. They were jagged and intricate, resembling runes. "I don't like this," Lily said, backing toward the door. "It's just an old cabin," David repeated, though his voice lacked conviction. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest grew unnervingly quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. The group lit a fire in the cabin's fireplace and set up their sleeping bags in the main room. Megan, always the skeptic, began exploring. In a corner, she found a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked with age, and the pages were filled with spidery handwriting. "Guys, listen to this," she said, reading aloud. "The whispers started on the third night. At first, I thought it was the wind. But the voices. They come from the walls." "What the hell?" Kyle said, leaning closer. Megan flipped to another page. "I see them in the woods, figures, watching. They never come close, but they're always there. I can feel them, waiting." Lily shivered. "Stop. This isn't funny." "It's just a story," David said, though his eyes lingered on the journal longer than he'd admit. That night, Megan woke with a start. The fire had died down to embers, and the room was plunged into darkness. She thought she'd heard something, soft, indistinct. Whispering. "Megan?" a voice said, barely audible. She sat up, her heart pounding. "David? Kyle? Lily?" But the others were sound asleep. The whispering grew louder, coming from the walls, just like the journal had described. She shook David awake. "Do you hear that?" David listened, his face pale. "What the hell is that?" The others woke as the whispering became a low murmur, surrounding them. It was in a language none of them recognized, guttural and rhythmic, like a chant. Kyle grabbed a flashlight and shone it around the room. The light caught something, a shadow darting across the wall, moving unnaturally fast. "Did you see that?" Kyle shouted. Before anyone could respond, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panic set in. The group scrambled to gather their things, deciding to leave immediately. But as they stepped outside, they saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, standing at the edge of the clearing. They were tall and impossibly thin, their faces obscured by shadow. They didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched. "Run!" David yelled. They bolted into the woods, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The trail was hard to follow, the map useless in their terror. The figures didn't chase them, but the feeling of being watched was suffocating. The whispering followed them, growing louder and more frantic. Lily tripped and screamed as a shadow passed directly over something on the fireplace mantel, a photograph. It hadn't been there the night. No one knows what happened to the group after that night. When a search party arrived weeks later, the cabin was empty. The only clue was the photograph on the mantel, now joined by another group of hikers, their faces frozen in terror. And if you ever find an old map leading to Black Hollow Cabin, do yourself a favor, burn it. Because once you step into the cabin, it never lets you go. The locals always warn hikers about Deadman's Creek, a winding trail that cut through the heart of the Oregon wilderness. It wasn't on any official map, but the stories about it were hard to ignore. Campers disappearing, strange lights seen at night, and a deep, bone-chilling cold that blanketed the area even in the height of summer. Jake, a thrill-seeker by nature, didn't believe in ghost stories. When his best friend Mia suggested they hike the trail with their friends Noah and Lisa, Jake scoffed at the warnings. "They're just stories to keep people away," Jake said, throwing his backpack into the trunk. "Nothing more." Noah wasn't so sure. "People disappear out there, Jake. Maybe we should stick to the main trails." But Mia rolled her eyes. "Come on, Noah. It'll be fun. What's the worst that could happen?" They left early Saturday morning, the crisp autumn air buzzing with anticipation. The trail was narrow and overgrown, winding through dense forests that seemed unnaturally quiet. No birds chirped, no animals rustled in the underbrush. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath their boots. Lisa, the most cautious of the group, glanced around nervously. "It feels wrong here. Like we're not supposed to be here." "Relax," Jake said, leading the way. "It's just a trail." Hours passed, and the sun began to dip below the horizon. The group reached a small clearing by the creek and decided to set up camp. The water was dark and sluggish, reflecting the fiery hues of the sunset. "This place is gorgeous," Mia said, snapping a photo. "Totally worth it." Lisa, however, couldn't shake her unease. "We shouldn't stay here. It feels off." Jake waved her off. "You're just scared because of the stories. Nothing's going to happen." But as night fell, Lisa's words would prove prophetic. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows against the trees. The group laughed and shared stories, their voices echoing into the dark. But as the hours wore on, an uneasy stillness settled over the campsite. It began with the smell. "What is that?" Mia asked, wrinkling her nose. It was faint at first, like rotting meat. But it grew stronger, overpowering. Noah gagged, covering his mouth. Something must have died nearby. Lisa stood, shining her flashlight toward the woods. "We should check it out. What if it's a bear?" Jake smirked. "Or maybe it's the ghost of Deadman's Creek." "Not funny, Jake," Lisa snapped. They split into pairs to investigate, Jake and Mia heading east while Lisa and Noah went west. The smell seemed to follow them, thick and suffocating. "What is that?" Mia whispered as they pushed deeper into the woods. Jake's flashlight caught something on the ground, a large pile of animal bones, picked clean. The stench was overwhelming. Mia gasped, clutching Jake's arm. "Let's go back. Now." By the time they regrouped, the smell had vanished, but something worse had taken its place. "Did you hear that?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "Hear what?" Jake replied, but even he was starting to look uneasy. It was faint at first, a soft whispering carried on the wind. It didn't sound like words, more like the rustling of leaves, but there was an unnatural cadence to it. "It's just the wind," Jake said, though his grip on the flashlight tightened. The whispers grew louder, circling the campsite. Shadows flickered just beyond the firelight, too fast to be animals. Mia clutched Noah's arm. "We should leave." "We can't hike out in the dark," Jake said. "We'll get lost." Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe that's the point." Around midnight, the fire began to die down, though no one had touched it. The shadows grew longer, darker, creeping closer to the group. Then they saw it. A figure stood on the other side of the creek. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by darkness. Its head tilted unnaturally to the side, as if it were studying them. "Who's there?" Jake called out, trying to sound braver than he felt. The figure didn't move. Lisa took a step back. "We need to go. Now." As they turned to grab their gear, the figure vanished. But the whispering didn't stop. The group decided to hike back to the car, despite the darkness. The trail seemed different, unfamiliar. Trees loomed closer, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. Jake led the way, but his confidence had evaporated. "Stay close," he whispered, his flashlight shaking. The whispering grew louder, now accompanied by faint footsteps behind them. Every time they turned, the shadows seemed to shift, darting out of sight. Mia stumbled, and Noah helped her up. "We're almost there," he said, though he didn't believe it. But then the figure appeared again, this time, blocking their path. It stepped into the beam of Jake's flashlight, and they finally saw it clearly. Its skin was gray and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to suck in the light. When it opened its mouth, the whispering poured out, a chorus of voices speaking in unison. "Leave," it said, though its lips didn't move. Jake raised his flashlight like a weapon. "Get back," he shouted. The figure lunged, faster than anything human. Chaos erupted. The group scattered, running blindly into the woods. Mia screamed as the figure appeared in front of her, then vanished before she could react. Noah tripped over a root, hitting the ground hard. Lisa helped him up, but the figure was closing in. "It's hurting us," Lisa realized, her voice breaking. "It doesn't want us to leave." Jake and Mia burst through the trees, finding the creek again. But it wasn't the same. It was wider, deeper, and the water ran red under the moonlight. "It's not real," Jake said, trying to convince himself. "This isn't real." The figure appeared on the opposite bank, watching silently. Desperate, Jake grabbed a large branch and swung it into the water, breaking the surface. The figure screamed, its voice splitting the air like thunder. "Run," Jake shouted. The group sprinted along the creek, the figure's screams fading behind them. After what felt like hours, they burst out onto the main trail. Their car was in sight. They didn't stop running until they were safely inside, locking the doors and speeding away. They never spoke of what happened that night, not to each other and not to anyone else. But each of them was haunted by the same nightmare, the figure standing at the edge of their bed, its hollow eyes watching, whispering the same words over and over. "You shouldn't have come." And to this day, locals warn hikers to stay away from Dead Man's Creek. Because once you've seen the shadow, it never lets you go.